Coming up on Jerusalem Dateline, an uneasy truce in Syria after days of chaos as tribal groups attack Druze communities. A Druze activist gives a harrowing description to CBN's Raj Nair. Plus, the Houthi campaign to wreak death and destruction in the Red Sea in the name of solidarity with the Palestinians. And the growing number of countries moving their embassies to Jerusalem to show support for Israel. All this and more coming up on this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Paul Strand. Israel defends its strikes deep inside Syria as necessary to protect Druze communities and enforce a demilitarized zone, while Prime Minister Netanyahu expresses regret after an Israeli tank shell hits a church in Gaza, killing 3. Chuck Holton brings us the latest.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is doubling down on Israel's recent strikes in Syria, calling them both defensive and strategic. The attacks came after days of brutal fighting in Ceuta between Syrian regime forces and Druze militias. Israeli warplanes struck key regime installations, including the Syrian Defense Ministry in Damascus.
We have a commitment to keep the southwestern Syria area as a demilitarized zone on the Israel border. We will not allow a situation to return where a second Lebanon is established there, and we are also committed to protecting the Druze residents.
Following the strikes, Syrian troops began pulling out of Ceuta overnight under a new truce brokered by the U.S., Turkey, and Arab states. Interim President Ahmad al-Sharaa addressed the Druze population directly in a televised message.
We assure you that protecting your rights and freedom is our priority, and we reject any attempt aimed at dragging you into an external side or causing division within our ranks.
But tensions remain high. Human rights groups say over 500 people were killed in the recent fighting. Druze militias are reportedly carrying out revenge attacks on Bedouin villages that supported the regime, and Syrian forces are preparing to return to the area. And Turkey's President Erdogan blasted Israel's involvement.
Israel, using the Druze as a pretext, has extended its banditry to our neighbor Syria over the past 2 days. I want to say this once again, clearly and plainly. Israel is a lawless, ruleless, unprincipled, spoiled, indulged, and frenzied terrorist state.
In Gaza, Israel is under renewed scrutiny after IDF tank fire accidentally hit the only Catholic church in Gaza, killing 3 people. The IDF says Hamas had been operating nearby, but confirmed civilian casualties.
I say this with the same breath. The army does everything to prevent harm to innocent people. Every case like this is thoroughly investigated.
President Trump reportedly pressured Netanyahu directly over the incident. Hours later, Netanyahu issued a public statement expressing regret. Church leaders have also spoken out.
The news we are receiving at this time is saddening, and its symbolic significance also causes us pain. A church has been attacked, a priest wounded. There are innocent victims. We must also remember that this church was watched over with care, affection, and fondness by Pope Francis.
And Ambassador Mike Huckabee is accusing Israel of delaying visas for Christian tour groups. He's threatening reciprocal actions unless the issue is addressed quickly. Meanwhile, ceasefire talks between Israel and Hamas are reportedly moving forward. A new proposal on the table would include the release of 10 Israeli hostages and a 60-day truce. Netanyahu met with his security cabinet Thursday to discuss the terms, but no final deal has been announced. From Jerusalem, I'm Chuck Holton for CBN News.
Syrian troops have withdrawn from Ceuta, but hundreds lie dead after Islamic tribal groups massacred Druze citizens there earlier this week in communities who had declared independence from the al-Jilani regime. Here's an excerpt from the conversation that CBN's Raj Nair had with Druze activist Monsour Ashkan.
Israel has carried out heavy airstrikes in Damascus, while the bloody rampage against the Druze in Syria spirals into chaos. Israeli Druze activist Monsour Ashkan is here with the breaking details. So, Monsour, we had you on just a couple days ago. Things are getting out of control. What can you tell us?
Things went south really, really fast. I don't know if you watched that video of that journalist in Damascus when she was saying Israel cuts, and right after it bombed, the whole building of the head of their military exploded. I think the Mossad must have timed this. She just said the name of the Ministry of Defense, and in that moment, the building blew up. Israel is sending a very clear message to Jolani, and I've heard some parliament members in Israel that even suggested that Israel should take him out, that enough is enough. Stop pretending that he's a partner for peace. He's a jihadist. And I don't know if you've seen these horrific videos that just came from the hospital in El Sueda just now. 1-to-1, October 7th. Dozens of bodies piled on one another in the hospital. Women, children, doctors, all slaughtered with the jihadists standing above them, stepping on them, spitting on them, and live vlogging themselves, live streaming. It's a tactic that we see that is happening all the time. And something very interesting that if you're wondering why there's so many Druze right now that are running into Sueda from Israel, you might have seen these images of Druze Israelis jumping over the fence, tear gas or not, and running into Sueda. There was an audio announcement, and I posted that on my Instagram. I translated from Arabic to English and Hebrew by some kind of an official or leader, some figure, where he's addressing the military, not only the jihadists, and he's telling them this: please stop recording the massacres on videos. Shave their beards, cut their mustaches, slit their throats, burn them. Just don't record it. And then he added this: learn from the mistake that we had in the coast. He's referring to the mistake when they slaughtered the Christians. He says, whoa, learn from that. We did that mistake then. Please do all these terrible things. Just don't record it. And then he adds, Israel is now targeting us by Air Force. So start using human shields. They're moving back to the human shields tactic. He says, like literally officially saying that, go into houses, use them as human shields, slaughter them, move to the next house. Hide your cars, your pickup trucks, your tanks, your dushkas in between civilian areas, so that will stop Israel from bombing them. We're seeing a textbook jihadist, ISIS, Hamas tactics by the government.
I've been to the Golan Heights dozens of times. I've been blessed to spend a lot of time with Druze and Druze villages. So I have a pretty, well, let's say at least a basic understanding of some of the situations. But for a lot of people that maybe haven't been to the Middle East, they're just really confused. It's like, okay, the Druze, which again is a different nationality, race, religion, however you want to say it, are being attacked by jihadists. Does that mean Jolani? Does that mean HTS? There's just I think a whole, there's so many narratives, because if you go to different websites, they'll just kind of brush it aside as clashes, or, this people group and the government's trying to do this and the other. And there's a graying, a muddying of the details. And so someone who's been there, I'm even trying to sift through this as someone who has family members in Sueda who, grew up in Israel. What is the reality of the situation right now in this very tense section of the Middle East?
I'm talking to my family in Sueda. I'm talking to other people in the front line and in the houses. And I actually heard some testimonies from people that were in that hospital. I don't know if they're safe now or not. The image is very clear. The ones that are massacring is El Jawlani, the HTS, is the government. I know it fooled the West for a very long time, but it is the government. This is an ISIS, this is an Al-Qaeda government. Nothing more, nothing less. That's why Israel is targeting right now. That's why there's ministers in Israel that are even saying we should take him down. This is El Jawlani, that is his people. They're the one committing these massacres. They're trying to make it look as if they're trying to control the situation. And they're literally just buying time so they can continue with this ethnic cleansing. People don't understand that you have videos of Jawlani before he was sent by ISIS to take over Syria, where he's interviewed and he's saying that his goal is to cleanse all of Syria and make it Sunnah. Bring the Sunnah mother.
It's a really hard thing for maybe someone in the West to marry those two ideas, right? He's former Al-Qaeda, former all these other crazy things, doing all these terrible things. And yet here he is taking pictures with Macron. The United States is dropping the HT off the terrorist list. It's a crazy situation. Let me ask you this. Whenever you hear the headline, Israel bombs Damascus, that gets a lot of attention. So maybe what's your perspective? Should Israel be bombing in Syria? Do your family members in Sueda want Israel to get involved? Should Israel get involved in Syria, another front that they have to deal with? What are your thoughts?
My thoughts and I've just spoke today with the deputy spokesman of the Knesset, and he said the same thing that I said. The Israeli government understands that we're not doing a favor to the Druze. These are our enemies as well.
2 ships sunk, 9 crew members dead, and the Houthis are back with a vengeance in the Red Sea after months of relative calm. Yemen's Iranian-backed rebels are again targeting international shipping, threatening global trade and testing U.S. deterrence. Chuck Holton reports, followed by our conversation about this after the break.
In less than a week, the Houthis have sunk 2 commercial ships in the Red Sea, the Magic Seas and the Eternity Sea. The second attack was especially brutal. After striking the vessel with a drone, Houthi fighters boarded the ship, opened fire inside, then planted explosives on the hull. Most of the crew is now missing. Many believed dead or taken hostage.
We've had a substantial loss of life. 9 crew members we know of have been killed on board the second vessel. What they do is they force the crew to abandon ship, and then they board the vessel, and using explosive charges will sink the vessel.
These attacks are part of a broader campaign the Houthis claim is in solidarity with Palestinians in Gaza. The timing, though, suggests something else could be driving the escalation. Not long ago, the Trump administration quietly signaled that Iran could sell oil legally to China, undercutting the Houthis' role in Iran's smuggling network and possibly their funding.
If I were to venture a guess, it has to do with Netanyahu being in Washington and with the fact that, of course, Iran and its network of allies has been taking a bit of a beating in the last couple of months.
After pausing major maritime attacks since December, the rebels have returned aggressively and with deadly effect.
They've also really expanded the idea of what constitutes an Israeli ship. Any ship in a company that touches Israel in any way makes all the vessels in the company susceptible to attack.
The broader impact is already being felt as global shipping companies reroute to avoid the Red Sea, costing more time and money.
Because of the attacks, about 40% of the shipping that normally goes through in terms of vessels have routed around Africa. That represents about 60% of the total cargo. Remember, about 15% of world trade heads through this area. So you're talking about maybe about 10% global trade now having to divert around Africa.
Here at Eilat, the empty port that you see behind me represents a loss of tens of billions of dollars a year to the Israeli economy. Before October 7th, this port used to see 250,000 vehicles come through here every year, as well as agricultural products and minerals from mining. And it only took a few months of attacks from the Houthis before they had to declare bankruptcy.
Despite all this talk about the ceasefire with the U.S., the attacks on Israel continued. But indeed, we haven't seen any real attacks on merchant shipping since December last year. And they're back with a bang.
I think the kinetic response by both the United States and the Israelis at this point is not producing the results they want. The only thing that produces a result in this type of scenario, historically speaking, what we've seen happen before, is one, a blockade of Yemen that cuts off the importation of these weapons into Yemen. The problem with that is the people who will suffer from that is the population of Yemen.
What we're also seeing from these attacks is, of course, that they still have the capability. So despite the intense aerial attacks by both Israel and the United States since the beginning of the year, that has not been enough to deter them from attacking merchant vessels.
Although on the day of the Eternity Sea attack, no Western warships patrolled here, the presence of naval assets likely isn't enough to calm the insurance market.
The big problem here is that because of the risk posed by the Houthis, the insurance, the war risk insurance to sail vessels through, really preclude the shipping companies from wanting to come back. And as long as it's cheaper to go around Africa than through the Red Sea, those ships are going to keep going around the longer route.
Until the Houthis are neutralized or the region is made secure, global trade through the Red Sea remains at risk. From Jerusalem, I'm Chuck Holton for CBN News.
We're now talking with Chuck Holton, CBN News war correspondent. So from your story, it seems to me like the Houthis just keep going. Like Hezbollah's been, half wiped out. Hamas is really weakened. What is it with the Houthis? There are much fewer of them than Hezbollah and Hamas.
It's not that they're not weakened. The strikes have certainly hurt them. But with Yemen, they've been enduring airstrikes for decades, and they're just used to them. As a matter of fact, I've kind of joked that Israel could make Yemen look like Gaza, and it would be an improvement because it's a giant dirt parking lot down there. So there's just not that much to actually bomb. And the coalition so far has been unwilling to go after the things that would actually make a difference, which is like critical infrastructure, power, the oil. They've blown up the oil facilities, but the things that are kind of dual use. So the Houthis, for example, get a lot of revenue from every cell phone that's used in Yemen. And in their controlled areas. So every cell phone has to buy their service from the Houthis. We could bomb all of their cell towers, and we could take that revenue away, but that would make the people of Yemen suffer that much more without having access to communications. So those sorts of things are a real quandary for a moral, just Western. I don't know that Western nations really have the stomach for war anymore. Back in World War II, we won World War II by being absolutely brutal to the people in Germany by firebombing Dresden and things like that. We're not willing to do those sorts of things anymore. And unfortunately, that's what. In order to win a war, you have to get your enemy to beg you to stop. And the only way to do that is to make them so miserable, to make that misery so acute that they can't take it anymore. But we're not willing to go that far.
And an interesting thing about Yemen is that the Houthis aren't in control of the whole country. So if you hurt the whole country, you're getting people who are the enemy of the Houthis. I mean, for a long time, this has just been sort of a proxy war for Saudi Arabia and Iran. You know, Iran, the Shiites, and that's what the Houthis are, and then Saudi Arabia, the Sunnis. And so really, the country, it's a very divided country. So if you do hurt everybody, you're also hurting the enemies of the Houthis.
Right, and they don't have to hurt everybody. They could strike the power infrastructure just in the Houthi areas, the telecommunications just in the Houthi areas, things like that. But it's still, you're talking about 6 or 7 million people that would be suffering even more than they have been. And like I say, the Houthis are just, they're desert dwelling people who are accustomed to that kind of hardship. And so you're not going to kill your way out of this one. The only way would be to completely choke off their ability to get the weapons that they're using against the world, and that would take a whole lot more than just a naval blockade. Now, one of the things that has actually, I think, led to some of this uptick in the violence there in the Red Sea is that at the end of the 12-day war with Iran, President Trump put out a post on social media that said now Iran can go back to selling oil to China. So they had to do that under the table before. Now they can do it in the open. The Houthis made money off of facilitating that illegal trade with China, and now the Houthis have lost that source of revenue to some extent. So they're looking for ways to replace that. One of the ways they can replace that is by getting extortion payments from ships that want to transit through the Red Sea, and sinking these 2 vessels off the coast last week sort of is an announcement that, okay, you're going to have to start really ramping up those payments.
I want to say this. The Houthis, one of the reasons they are such strong fighters and all is they are really fanatical. And they say that death to America and death to Israel isn't just a slogan with them. It's a way of life. And that way after, we have heard that the reason they're missiling Israel all the time is because of the Gaza war. But they're saying after that, they still have to go at it because it's a divine promise from God himself, Allah, that Israel will be wiped out. And this is their divine mission, and they say it's their faith against the infidelity of the Jews. So
and I think in that lies the justification for going harder against the Houthis as a nation, because, look, if your entire worldview revolves around who you hate and want to kill, you don't get to have nice things. And I think that the world body could make a case for, look, I'm sorry, but until you are weak enough not to be able to threaten your neighbors, you don't get to have telecommunications. You don't get to have power. You don't get to have all those modern conveniences, any fuel or anything like that. And just choke them to the point where they are they cannot threaten you. They're always going to have the inclination. What we have to go after is the wherewithal.
Amen. Well, thank you so much, Chuck Holton, CBN News war correspondent.
Since the U.S. moved its embassy to Jerusalem in 2018, a number of nations have followed, and more are being encouraged to do so. Our bureau chief, Chris Mitchell, brings us the story of countries taking practical steps to show support for Israel.
Jerusalem is the undisputed It is the undivided capital of the Jewish state of Israel.
U.S. Ambassador Mike Huckabee spoke at a recent ceremony recognizing nations relocating their embassies to Jerusalem. Since the U.S. paved the way 7 years ago, Guatemala, Honduras, Kosovo, Papua New Guinea, and Paraguay moved their embassies. Others are said to be in the planning stage.
Argentina, Czechia, Fiji, and other countries too. And we're working very hard together with the government as an NGO to persuade them and to encourage them. And I think the more embassies that move to Jerusalem, the better it is for Israel, the better it is for the West.
Chaim Silberstein, chairman of the Jerusalem Center for Applied Policy, started the group to identify challenges and seek opportunities for the capital city. He takes global policymakers through the city, explaining why Jerusalem matters.
The best way to understand the situation is to visualize it, to see it, to feel it. God has given us Jerusalem, and Jerusalem is always will be and always has been the capital of Israel. But the fact that countries come and recognize it as part of the real politics of the world is so important for us. And we need to strengthen that because we know that Israel and the Jewish people have many enemies around the world.
Silberstein says building and maintaining support has become more urgent since October 7th and the ongoing war.
The State of Israel has worked and is working very hard to harness all those countries that support Israel, because unfortunately there are many that have fallen to the fake news and the false propaganda of what's going on in the war.
Former Deputy Mayor Flor Hassan Nahum points to the city's iconic history.
Jerusalem is the city which is not just the capital of the State of Israel. It's not just the capital of the Jewish nation, but it is the city that made us a nation. 3,000 years ago, King David decided that he needed one united capital to unite the tribes of Israel. So Jerusalem is the place we became the indigenous people of this land. And so your recognition is not just historic, it is practical, and it is the reality that we have today.
In 1967, when Israel reclaimed the city after more than 2,000 years, it marked a profound, and many believe, prophetic turning point.
Back then, soldiers of the Israel Defense Forces fought their way through these ancient streets with trembling voices and tear-filled eyes. They declared, Har Habayit Be'adeinu. The Temple Mount is in our hands. Since that miraculous moment, Jerusalem has been rebuilt, renewed, and reopened to peoples of all faiths. Yet, though the armed struggle for Jerusalem was won 58 years ago, the diplomatic struggle still endures. Far too many nations still refuse to recognize this self-evident and fundamental fact that Jerusalem has always been and will forever remain the capital of the people of Israel.
Ambassador Huckabee recounted a sobering conversation he overheard during the ceremony for the U.S. Embassy relocation to Jerusalem.
The young American said, I've been so excited about this, moving our embassy to Jerusalem. I haven't slept in 2 nights. The elderly Jewish gentleman just looked at him and said, the Jews haven't slept in 2,000 years. And now they can sleep knowing that when we pray for the peace of Jerusalem, we are praying for the peace of the capital of the Jewish state, the undivided capital of the Jewish state.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Thanks, Chris. Well, that's all for this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. Thanks for joining us. Remember to follow us on social media. And you can access CBN content through our CBN News and other CBN apps. And don't forget to sign up for our email blast so you can continue to receive all of our CBN content. And please, keep praying for the peace of Jerusalem, for the hostages to come home safely, and for God to thwart the plans of evil men. I'm Paul Strand. For all of us at the Jerusalem Bureau, we'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.